Something that I've taken away from the recent trailers for House of the Dragon Season 2 is that they seem to confirm what many fans had suspected for a while now, since set photos began to appear online over the summer. That while, of course, House of the Dragon will be sticking to the wider story we see unfold in the books, there will also be a number of departures from the source material, most very minor, some more significant, but they are the kind of changes that needed to be made during the adaptation process from page to screen, in order to flesh out and add depth to the characters that Fire and Blood can only do on a surface level due to the nature of the text being told as a fictional history book. If the writers were literally just adapting the text as it stands, the show would be very short with lots of holes in the story. Filling in those gaps makes the story, well, function properly. Now, the reason I wanted to make this video is because I am at heart a book purist. I would always rather have a show remain as close to the source material as it can. But having studied screenwriting and having worked in TV, I know that the reality of that is not really so simple for a multitude of reasons, only made harder due to the kind of book Fire and Blood is, which will require some level of creative freedom for the writers to some degree. In fact, I wrote my master's degree dissertation about the challenges of adapting books to screen, and used Game of Thrones as an example of adapting being done well and badly at the same time by the same writers. Now, the issue House of the Dragon faces is regardless of the source material, it comes with the legacy Game of Thrones left behind. It's no secret that many fans, including myself, were dissatisfied with the writing of Season 8, and for me, I wasn't particularly happy with the writing post-Season 5 in general, as the show moved further and further away from the source material, and more importantly, the themes of the book. Many of the issues with the writing quality in those later seasons is often attributed to how far the writers moved away from the source material, even when they had book content left to adapt. For example, just how much content was skipped over and cut from A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. Thus, I can understand why it seems like House of the Dragon, making changes such as Alicent and Rhaenyra's ages, and the context of their relationship, did make fans a bit nervous. I'm not going to sit here and pretend House of the Dragon Season 1 was a flawless adaptation, but on balance compared to what had come before with the last few seasons of Game of Thrones, combined with the kind of book they are trying to adapt, requiring them to flesh out and add context where needed, it did a decent job. The trailer for Season 2 suggests there will be more changes in the coming season, and I just want to spend some time going over some of them, discussing why these changes may have been made, because what I found with many of them is they're not truly changes from the book, more like added content that very well could have happened, that fleshes out the characters without really impacting the overarching story in a meaningful way. There are some shots in the new trailers that show Rhaenyra and Syrax on a beach with some fishermen, with what appears to be something wrapped in a white sheet. Now, even without the knowledge of the leaked set photos and the other shot of the funeral for Lucerys shown in the trailer, it definitely suggests that Rhaenyra will likely be spending some time, probably during the first episode, looking for Lucerys' body. Did this happen in the book? No, but it could have happened. It is unlikely to have happened, but it does make sense that Rhaenyra would want to try and find her son's body. As part of fleshing out her character, it adds a lot to the story, and in the context of the show, it does make sense. In the book, it is implied that Lucerys' body was never found, with it likely being at the bottom of the ocean or eaten by Vhagar during the fight, with some suggestion he may have even washed up ashore alive, but simple-minded, living out his days as a fisherman, with no memory of his previous life. But there is not even a hint of a rumour that Rhaenyra went looking for Lucerys' body. Critics of this change do have some valid points, namely that what Rhaenyra is doing is quite frankly risky, flying so close to Storm's End, who is now allied with your enemies. While Syrax of course offers Rhaenyra some degree of protection, as we learn from Prince Aemon Targaryen's death in 92 AC on Tarth, all it takes is a well-placed crossbow bolt from a hidden position to kill someone, dragon or not. I think there is also a valid argument in the idea that surely if Rhaenyra did something like this, it would have been recorded in the history books, especially if there was some kind of funeral for Lucerys. There would be some note of it, Ultimately, given the pace of Season 2 is likely going to have, with it being a lot slower than Season 1, given the events we know it will cover, scenes like this that fill in the gaps of fire and blood are going to be vital in making sure characters such as Rhaenyra still have a well-defined character arc over the season, and not just having her treading water on Dragonstone for most of the war. Ultimately, due to the nature of the TV show, she's going to be a much more active part of the story, even if that doesn't go quite as far as having her fighting in battles, which would be a much bigger departure from the books than something like this. Some more big book changes coming to Season 2 involves Jace's trip to the north to treat with Cregan Stark. We have known for a long time, because I believe HBO actively stated that Jace will be going to the Wall, and some concept art shown in the background of a behind the scenes video suggesting that White Walkers will also be making an appearance. Now, in the book, Jace does in fact go to Winterfell to meet with Cregan Stark, and we do know a little bit about what happened whilst he was there. We are told they got on very well, with some suggestion Jace had some kind of relationship with Cregan's bastard sister, Sarah Snow, with some even going as far as suggesting he in fact married her. But other than that, because of the kind of book Fire and Blood is, that is all we know of Jace's time there. Much like the situation with Rhaenyra, there is nothing in the book to suggest that Jace and Cregan didn't go to the Wall. He was at Winterfell long enough for them to make that trip. It is clear, especially with the suggestion of White Walkers could be making an appearance, that in the show, at least this idea of Jace going to the Wall might be linked with the idea of Aegon's prophecy, with Jace now invested in the concept of it and its importance. Given that, it would make sense that he would want to see the Wall. Also, if you factor in the theory that it was in fact Aegon's prophecy that convinced Torrhen Stark to bend the knee to Aegon the Conqueror, it would seem possible that, like how Aegon's prophecy was passed down from Targaryen king to Targaryen king, that knowledge of it could have also been passed down between the lords of House Stark. So with Aegon's prophecy, it kind of makes sense in the context of the show why this change would be made. The same argument about fleshing out both the story and the characters also applies here. Look, I'm not the biggest fan of the inclusion of Aegon's prophecy in House of the Dragon, but I don't hate it. If the show is going to go down this path, then I at least want them to make some attempt to make it matter in the story even a little bit, like Jace's trip to the Wall will. Ultimately, like the changes with Rhaenyra, it adds to the story without really changing its direction or path in an impactful way, whilst helping to add depth to the characters and story within the context of the show. The final thing I want to talk about is the Battle of Rook's Rest. From the 3 trailers we have so far, we've actually seen a fair amount of it. Even from that first teaser trailer, there was a lot of speculation that Baela would in fact be at the battle, which I believe would perhaps be the biggest departure from the book so far in Season 2. Baela was unequivocally not at Rook's Rest in the book. Much of why people think she might be in the show comes down to the fact she is seen in the trailer at the same location as Rook's Rest seemingly is, with her on her dragon Moondancer, wearing chainmail, screaming in anger before diving with her dragon. Now, this apparent change is the most ambiguous of the 3 I have chosen to talk about, as unlike the others, we don't really know for sure if this one is in fact happening, but a lot of things are pointing that way. From the comments I've been getting, the idea of Baela being at Rook's Rest is the change so far that has upset fans the most, and I can kind of understand why. On a surface level, it is a big change, and one I don't think they necessarily needed to make, but I don't actually believe it's as bad as it seems. What I believe could actually be happening is that Baela is at Rook's Rest, but not necessarily part of the battle. I think things will play out as they do in the book, with Aegon and Aemond ambushing Rhaenys, but the difference being I think Rhaenys will choose to stay and fight to save Baela, giving her time to escape, knowing that they can't beat Vhagar and Sunfire. Rhaenys still dies and gets a heroic death, but also saves the life of her granddaughter. It is a big change from the book, but I think it might serve a really important purpose within the wider story. Much like the examples we've already discussed, it will really help add more layers to the story and give Baela a lot more to do, something I know a lot of fans have been asking for post Season 1, with so many of her scenes having been cut. More importantly, it will be a vital character development moment for Baela. It will make her fight against Aegon during the last days of the Dance of the Dragons on Dragonstone even more impactful and important, with this possible added layer of her avenging her grandmother. The change in itself, however, cannot be defended in the same way as the others. You can't just say, well, history didn't record her being there. thus it could still have happened. The accounts of Rook's Rest and the battles in general in the Dance of the Dragons are some of the more detailed parts of the history in the books. If Baela was at Rook's Rest in the books, I'm fairly certain we'd know about it. But regardless, I still think in the context of the story the show is trying to tell, Baela being present at Rook's Rest is by far one of the least egregious changes that could be made, as long as it has a narrative purpose and serves the character. Changes are always going to happen when adapting a book to screen, and a book like Fire and Blood, as much as I personally love it, needs to be fleshed out to make it work as a TV show. Season 1 had to do this with arguably mixed results, but on balance the show was still very enjoyable. Season 2 is going to have changes as well, and these 3 examples I've chosen to talk about are just what I can work out from the trailers so far, but I can see how they fit into the wider context of the show and fit around what has been established in the books. Will these changes be good? Well, that's hard to say until we see the show on June 15th. I think it's fair to wait and see before really casting too much judgment over it and go in with an open mind. I get the feeling HBO are very aware of the issues with the later seasons of Game of Thrones and will be doing everything they can to avoid the same mistakes again, but ultimately only time will tell.